Hello folks, it's David with Ural Motorcycles. This is part 2 of the videos I've been doing on this black bike. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the lower shock hardware on the sidecar swing arm. If there's tension on the hardware because of the little rubber part and you can't get the hardware out easy, you can just put a little pressure on it. And get it to release. And then you can just slide the shock back. Next we have the massive bolts on the front of the swing arm that attach it to the frame. So we're going to remove those next. If you haven't got a lot of clearance here and you're real close to the fender here. So I use my 22mm wrench, box end first to break it loose, and just spend the time running them out with the wrench instead of trying to get a ratchet in there and possibly scratching something. Don't lose them. So I cut the zip tie on the brake line, move that all the way over here to get it out of my way, make sure nothing flops on anything. Made sure that my wiring harness was not going to get in the way of anything. And from here it's just, I put my hand under here so it doesn't accidentally hit the fender. And it's just a matter of finagling it out of these mounts. And then you can gently rotate it. Voila. Swing arm out. Not too bad, huh? We got to replace this one with that one. But the only one I have available doesn't have the guts in it. You can see the bushings and the threaded part are already pressed in, but not the bearings. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to show you what the internals look like. This is the little cap that fell off, and that just fits over here to cover this inner bearing. It goes right there. This is just the spacer that takes up the distance between the bearings. And then you got your outer bearing. And then there's the protective washer. And this actually fits snugly on there. And then the machine surface gets pressed in to that bearing inside this machined area here. So it's just like that. And then this part is what goes in here to take up, it's a distance ring that takes up space. When the shaft is, this is what you would see from the outside before the wheel is on. That's the, actually it wouldn't be that far, but it would be like that. And that's the little ring that can wear out. It is a wear item, as I've said before, so you just want to periodically check it. Now the one I took out is completely serviceable. I probably would just deburr it a little bit, and then, but the thickness is fine. But because I work at Ural, I'm just replacing it with a new one. Anyway, that's what's involved. That's what's going on inside the back end of the swing arm. It's really not scary at all once you see all the individual components. But I'm gonna take all this now over to the press and make it a complete assembly. And there we are. 10 minutes setting up the press, 5 minutes actually using it, and we have a beautiful, brand new, assembled factory swing arm. So reverse order of the way it came out. We're going to guide this in around the wiring harness to bring this up into place. That can rest there. Like that? You want to say hi to the folks, Jason? Okay, so you get that all snugged up, and then you're going to torque it with a 22mm socket to 88 Newton meters, or what is that, 64.9, 65 foot-pounds. Now you're going to want to put your shock hardware back in, but you're going to have to contend with this little rubber piece again. But you can usually get everything to line up. So we're at the point where we're going to be putting the drive shaft back in through the sidecar swing arm. So I took this opportunity to clean everything up and inspect everything, and I made sure I felt the U-joints to make sure there was no dragging or crunching going on in there. And then I also, while it was out, I went ahead and lubed it because it's easier to get to. And then the spline area here, I put a nice coating of waterproof marine grade grease on it, so everything will be all fresh and new for when we stuff it back in the swing arm. Okay, so we're going to stick this in just like we did before. But you don't want to forget your plastic cap. So that sits on there just like that. Then you're going to guide this over to the swing arm. And then remember the zip tie from the first video. I'm just going to hang this up there so it doesn't scratch things up on the frame. Now you don't need to go hammering or pounding on anything. All you have to do is make sure that it's lined up, that the splines on the input shaft are lined up with the little gear drive inside, and then you can put the wheel back on and let the axle nut take up the slack and seat this. Before we put on the wheel, we want to give some grease on these splines too, that receive the wheel. And here's that very important distant ring. Do not forget to do this before you install the wheel. And if you want, you can even get a little grease on this guy too. It's not going to hurt anything. Boop. Just goes right back there. So never in all my time with Ural have I seen where you couldn't hand install this shaft and have it come through enough to have a few 3, 4, 5, 6 threads stick out past the wheel, even though it isn't seated all the way. I suppose if it did happen that you couldn't get it started enough to expose some threads to draw it in with the wheel as you tighten up the castle nut, you could probably give it a little bit of tap with a rubber mallet and it would be okay from the drive shaft end. Or you'd have to disassemble the stub shaft, the input shaft, and hammer it from the back, because the thing you want to be cautious of is hurting your U-joints. You don't want to be impacting them with a lot of force trying to drive it in. But I mean, if you need a little tap 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 to get it started, I guess you could use a rubber mallet. Like I said, I've never needed to do that. Then you put your wheel on. There it goes. See, and I got about 1, 2, 3, 4 threads sticking through. I can just see the hole in the axle where the cotter pin goes through. So that's enough to get it started. If I'm cautious, I won't strip out any threads. Now, over the years, this has changed too. Some models, newer ones I think, will have a washer here that goes over the face of the seal. Some of the castellated nuts, I believe on the CT, had a chamfer that rode on the inner part of the metal part there of the bearing, so it wouldn't affect the seal. This one came stock just with a flat castle nut, and that inner part of the bearing there is actually where the castle nut rides. You can see where it's all shiny on the back of the castle nut. What I see people do is they get this started and then they lower the bike to the ground so the tire won't spin, and they can use that as leverage to tighten this up slowly and draw the shaft into the swing arm. And you can do that or I've even used my rubber mallet and just locked it in there. And then you take your 27mm wrench, which is also your spare tire nut removal tool. You just flip it around so the little spikes are facing out, and then you can slowly start putting that on there. And I actually have a nice little handle I made a long time ago to give myself some more leverage. And slowly but surely, it'll draw that through. And if this isn't an easy draw through and you feel any resistance, stop, because you got something misaligned. Okay, so you got the axle in place now, you got your wheel on, you got your castle nut on. Now let's talk about tightening the castle nut. You want to make sure that it's securely on the shaft and that the hole is aligned for the cotter pin to go through, and that there's no side-to-side movement or wiggling around. So you want to get it as tight as you can. Where everything aligns and there's no movement in the wheel, or it's not loose on the bearing, and you can still get the cotter pin in. There's a lot of controversy about how to do this on a Ural. You just want to make sure it's tight and there's no side-to-side play in the wheel. And now that you've seen how all of that goes together and it's basically held in compression, this is why you need to periodically go back and check. And if you hear any noises like unusual rubbing, or you hear a clunk clunk going around a corner, you're going to want to lift this up in the air, and you're going to want to grab it and just wiggle it and make sure that that hasn't loosened up, because if you've replaced anything or the bike is new, as it sets in and the lateral load going around corners, the movement of the tire straight up and down, not leaning into a turn, that can wreak havoc on these bearings and where it was set when it was originally set up, assembled. So you're going to want to periodically check that to make sure that it's tight. Install a brand new cotter pin. The way you orientate your cotter pin is up to you. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. Again, everybody's got an opinion what's best. I just bend this down, but I don't. I just bend it so it will clear the hubcap, and I leave it at that. And then you can install your hubcap. You should install with a pop. You shouldn't have to use a hammer or anything on it, or you can end up fracturing the edge. Install your Sidecar swing arm caliper. Tighten with a 17mm tool and then torque to 50 Newton meters, which is 36.9 foot-pounds, so 37 foot-pounds. Zip tie the wiring harness and the brake line back to where they were. Now you're going to want to make sure that your drive shaft is phased correctly, so whatever way the end of the drive shaft is, you want to make sure you install the coupler the same way. Take the drive shaft off the zip tie, install the clamp for the rubber boot. I use a little grease off the splines to lube the shaft so the boot will go on easier. You're going to want to orientate the yoke, like I said, or the coupler, like I said, to match the other side. You can try one tooth or another. You're going to just have to choose which is closest, because oftentimes they're not going to be exact. This is just the nature of Ural and the drive shafts. Close as it will get, and that's what you're left with. And you can slide it onto the axle and final drive. Click in the two-wheel drive, rotate the wheel, and you can align the flange with the final drive. Put your bolts into the flange to hold it in place. Put your axle washer on there and the axle nut. It's a little tight, but you can usually get it in there. Get those started, and then you can get the boot and the clamp on. These are a little tight with the factory ones. Cut that zip tie off and get out of the way, and then tighten your clamps down for the rubber boot to keep out dirt, debris, moisture. Then you can jack the Sidecar up and remove the jack stand and get it back on the ground. With the Sidecar tire on the ground now, it'll create friction through the drive shaft, and you can tighten up your flange bolts. Sidecar tire prevents it from turning. Put it back in one-wheel drive. Hold the axle with a tool so it doesn't rotate, and then you can tighten up your axle nut. Once your axle nut is tight, then you can tighten the pinch bolt with a 17mm ratchet and wrench, or 2 wrenches, or whatever you got. Take the bike off the center stand and do an initial walk around, and then you can take it for a test ride. there we are. Because of the work I had to do, I was able to show you how to remove a drive shaft on the sidecar, change a swing arm, and generally how it goes back together. I'm going to go take a nice long test ride now because it's Friday and the sun's out. So cold start 2017 Gen 1 EFI. See how she does. This is a sweet, sweet runner. Very nice. Well, I'm going to let it warm up and then I'm going to go take a ride and test out all the brakes and everything that I did. And I'll talk to you next time.